Hey, what's up guys? Pawel Munoz here and welcome to another mini series where I'm going to show you how to use the Adobe 3D tools in action. So we're going to start with Adobe 3D Sampler, where we're going to create basically the PBR custom materials, moving on to Adobe 3D Painter, where we're going to combine those materials and finalize this workshop in Adobe Stager. We're going to basically present and render the entire scene. So this first part of the workshop is all about creating your own custom materials from photos in Adobe 3D Sampler. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so to get started, I just want to give you a little bit of context. So this image that you can see here on the screen, this is a render from Adobe 3D Stager, and it's using the materials that I created in Adobe 3D Sampler. And of course, I put them all together and I painted them in Adobe 3D Painter. But you know, the quality and the stylization and everything that you can see here in this image, that's kind of like what we're aiming for. Other than that, I put together a simple Moodboard in PureRef. So this is the software that you can see here on top of the render, so that you have an idea of what we are aiming for as well, and the type of textures that I collected. So for the mug number one, so the first glass, I'm gonna go for some kind of like glazed ceramic, something like this, that has a pretty interesting set of colors and textures, but ultimately it's pretty simple, and that's the idea. We're going to start with something very simple to get the hang of the software, and then we're going to move on to something a bit more complex with the second asset. Maybe combine some different materials. Then we're going to move into the bowl, which is going to be a little bit more, a bit rougher, something more, I would say less perfect, more organic in terms of the shape as well and the material. And then we're going to finalize the workshop with this specific asset, which is, a jug, something like this. I think it will be pretty interesting. This is kind of like the base that I use to model the asset, combination of those two things. But yeah, it's going to be pretty simple in terms of what we're going to be building, and then go to a more complex setup of the material as we move along. But the assets and the meshes are pretty simple. In fact, let me just minimize this for a second and show you in ZBrush what they look like. So these are the assets that I put together in ZBrush. They're actually super simple. The complexity is going to be given by the material itself, all the details. So if I go to this asset right here, you see it's pretty smooth surface. I only sculpted kind of like this area so that it feels like the handle is being attached a bit, a bit rough, but it is pretty simple. The details, like I said, is all going to be given by the materials that we're going to be creating. So going back to what I was saying, these textures and these patterns, these are photographs from Unsplash. So I'm going to provide the link to each one of the textures that I'm going to be using in the actual material. But this is just to give you an idea of what I'm going for, right? So in terms of textures or the quality of the surface, this is the type of ceramics that I'm going to be creating, or the type of texture that I will be creating. And these are kind of like the patterns, just to give it a bit more of a design element and a bit of color as well, just to add some contrast to the final composition. But you can go ahead and do, use any image that you want, right? I just want to provide a variety of options so that you can see that this is a workflow that can be replicated, and you can use it to create any type of material. All right, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and concentrate on the first glass, and we're going to keep it super simple. All right, so here we are in Adobe 3D Sampler. I'm just going to walk you through how to set up these materials step by step. So I'm going to click on Create New. This is the first thing that you should see. Otherwise, if you have already used it, you probably have this screen like so. I'm not going to go through every single feature. Just want to show you some of the important things that I think that are important to create the materials. So the first one is here on the bottom left. If you click on Viewer Settings, here's where you can change things like the mesh, where you can preview the material. So if you're doing something like clothing or some kind of fabric, you can use either the t-shirt or the cloth. And these are just preview meshes, just so that you can see how the material that you're creating looks in a specific type of mesh. So I'm going to go for a sphere just to keep it very simple, but you can choose whatever you want, right? So let's click on the sphere. I just want to show you that that is there. And the other thing is the environment, right? So the environment is the lighting that you can see, or that you will see a little bit better once I add the material. But I prefer to use a studio lighting like this one, rather than something a bit more, more interesting for a render, just because I don't want to have influence of any color light or any color reflections, right? We can do that at render time, but during the material building, this is the one that I would recommend, or any of these studio lighting that they don't have a lot of color in it. So I'm just going to leave things as default, but I just want to show you where things were. All right, in terms of the navigation, if I press the Alt key and left mouse, I can rotate things around. If I press Alt and right click, I can zoom in and out. I can also use the mouse, the scroll wheel on the mouse. And if I press the Alt key and middle mouse button, I can pan around. So pretty standard way of navigating. Another important command is the Shift key and right click that allows you to rotate the environment. And you'll see that more clearly when I add the material. But that's pretty much it, really. There's no other things that we need to change at this stage. And the way that this works is, again, super simple. These are some of the images that I collected from Unsplash. So let's go ahead and start with something like this one right here, right? So I'm going to click on that and drag it in here, or into you can drag it anywhere really. And this is what we're gonna get. Now, for the most part, this image to material with AI powered settings is the one that you're gonna use for most of your materials, unless you're doing something very specific. So I'm gonna keep it simple and leave it as image to material, click OK. And now Sampler is gonna do its magic and create an entire material based on that photo. There we go. Now we can rotate things around, and if I hold Shift and right click, I can move the light around. So you can see just by dropping that image, we already have some decent kind of like surface noise. It sort of recognizes these bumps. It looks like a planet, which is pretty cool. But all of these bubbles and all of these variation in color and in height and well, in normal, that's all automatic. I don't have to do anything else. I just dropped an image and Sampler created the material. Of course, now the whole point is to tweak it so that it fits our needs, right? It fits that sort of ceramic or glazed ceramic type of style with the color. Now, the first thing I want to show you is the layer stack. So as you can see, this one on the right-hand side has all the different layers and all the different effects. The base material is what it is generated by default with the image that we dropped in. And then it has this effect or this layer effect that is the image to material, right? So if we select this, anything that you select, you'll have kind of like the properties at the bottom. So by selecting the image to material, we can go ahead and tweak the basis of this material. Now, if I go ahead and bring in the original photo that I dropped in, you'll see it's a little bit darker than what you can see here. That is because of the D-Light intensity, which is actually a pretty cool tool if you have a photo that has a lot of contrast between the light areas and the shadows. But in this case, we don't need it. So let me just turn that off. So if we go to the image to material and we scroll to the bottom, there is this D-Light intensity. So right now it's set to 1. I like to set it to 0 in this case, obviously. We will try to use this later on, but this is basically what this slider does. It tries to change or remove the difference between the shadows or the contrast in the shadows and the light. So delights the image. That's the first thing, right? We can also click on roughness, and if we scroll down, we can variate the roughness of this material. So if I set it to 0, this is like super reflective now. So that immediately, just by changing that, gives us that really interesting sort of like glaze ceramic look. But you know, it is too intense. Now, in this roughness, we can also use variations to vary the roughness. So not everything or not every single area of this material will have the same quality or the same level of roughness. So we can use this variation to 0 or to 1 to vary that a little bit. Maybe you can add a bit more to the base so that it's not super reflective. You can also change the variations in softness. And if you want to see these changes a little bit better, here at the top, we have this 2D view. So if I click on that, we have the ability to jump between the different maps that 3D Sampler is generating. So the base color, that's essentially our image or our D-Light image. We have the normal, we have the roughness, the metallic, the height, the ambient occlusion, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to click on roughness so that we can see what we're doing. So if I set it to 0, you see this is pretty dark, and we have variations of 1. So if I change the variation to 0, this is going to be, you know, pretty plain. Right? So this is what we are actually changing in the roughness. We're not affecting the color or anything else. We're affecting just the roughness. I'm going to go to a variation of 1 and maybe just add a bit more contrast in here. And the softness or the variation softness, that's kind of like the transition between the lighter color and the darker color. So we can do this to make it a bit sharper, or we can push it all the way to 1 to make it almost like blurring that effect. So I think somewhere in between is fine. This slider here, this actually tries to maintain the, you know, the the highlights or the brightness of the albedo. So the albedo is literally just the base color. So it tries to maintain, all these bright areas. So you can say, yes, I want the albedo details to be very important, meaning that you want to favor some of the bright areas over the dark areas. So if you pay attention to these areas right here, the white or lighter areas and the yellow areas, if I go to the roughness and I change this albedo importance to 0, this is pretty much the same all the way, from the top, right? So all the colors are basically the same. If I push this importance to 1, now you can see that these lighter areas are actually darker, which means they're going to be more reflective in here. So I'm going to keep it simple. I want to have like the same importance across the entire material. But I just want to show you that you have the ability to jump into the 2D view and visualize the maps one by one. All right, so that's number one, right? Just take the image to material and tweak some of the initial setups or some of the initial sliders. The other one that we can tweak around is the geometric equalizer. So this slider allows you to go to 0, where we basically flatten everything quite a bit, or we can push it all the way to 100 or to 50, and 50 gives us almost what we had before, right? So pretty exaggerated effect. So let's go back, because this is the one that I like to tweak first, because I don't want to have that much influence. There we go. So something like this should be fine to get started, maybe a little bit more actually. All right, something like that. And I'm constantly holding shift and right click to rotate in the environment. That's what you see the lights like going through, because that allows me to check the reflectivity and all the crevices that I'm creating. Awesome. All right, the other thing is this seam right here. Don't worry too much about that. We're gonna tackle that in the next material, the next video. But so far, all I've done is in the image to material, delight the image, tweak the roughness values to vary the specularity and the reflectivity of this material, and the equalizer or the geometry equalizer. Now, one very important thing is the displacement quality or the displacement amount. So I'm going to go ahead and close these parameters. Right? So these are the 3 things that you will see here in the image to material. But at the very bottom of the layer stack, you have the base material. So this base material allows you to select presets. So if we're doing something metallic, you can choose this as the starting point, and but for the most part, the base material will work just fine. So this material has the ability to change things like roughness, metallic, everything from the base. So if I take this metallic and set it to 1, we just need to wait to see the final result in here, and there we go. It's now 100% metallic, this material that we're creating, right? So it's just a matter of tweaking that slider from the base material. But this is not a metallic, so no point. I just wanted to show you that changing something in the material or in the base material would actually affect the entire stack. And it just takes a little while to update everything. Now, if I go down to the bottom, I'm going to click on height. And I'm also going to open up these settings here at the bottom of and these are just preview settings. So nothing to do with the material, it's just how you preview it. So let's click on displacement. And you can see that right now, what we can see on the screen, the height is set to 0.2, but the height of the base material is set to 0.5. So we need to make sure that these two values are the same. And this is something that, again, for consistency, it works better, or at least I found it works better if you maintain the same numbers. So what I like to do is set this to, let's say, 0.2 or 0.1. There's not going to be a lot of changes here. And that way I can ensure that whatever I see is going to be consistent if I set it to the same height. So 0.1 in the height. Let's go back to this material, and we are, we're pretty much there. I mean, it's just an image that we just dropped in, and we got all that information from that single image. Now, if I go ahead and open up the 2D view again, and we go to the normal, right? The normal is the one that is going to give us all that tiny bubble and tiny details. And if I go to the height as well, you see there's quite a bit of contrast in the kind of like highlights and dark areas. So what I like to do to sort of have more control over the height and the normal as well is to bring the first additional layer to control these, all of these bumps. So I want to have something a bit flatter, right? So let's get out of this one, turn it off. And I'm going to go here in the layer stack at the top where it says add layer. I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to search for height. So I'm just going to start tapping hide, and let's go to normal and hide adjustment. So this is an effect that is going to sit on top of everything. And I don't know if you saw what it happened there. It just changed. I'm going to turn it on and off so you can see. So this is without it, and this is with it. So it sort of allows you to control the intensity of the normal and the hide separately. So if I turn on the 2D and turn this on and off, you can see there's a significant change maybe in this area and this area. Let's see, right? It sort of changes, and yeah, it's kind of like equalizing the normal map, right? The same thing happens with the hide. So if I click on the hide just to visualize it, right now nothing is happening because we don't have that enabled, but we can go to the normal and hide adjustment properties and click on this switch to enable that, and you can change it from auto to range. So let's see what that's giving us. Not much at the moment, but we can set it to range, and we can control the range, right? So this is kind of like overriding what we did in the base material. So let's set this to 0.1 and just leave it as it is, or turn it off. I actually don't want to change the hide, so I just want to show you that you can do it. But the only thing that I'm going to do is from the normal and hide adjustment is to tweak the slider of the intensity of the normal. So I'm going to select normal. Let's get a bit closer to see the sharpness of those details. And in here, also get closer as well. We rotate the light a little bit. And of course, let's go ahead and turn this on. And I can take the normal intensity all the way down. So at -0, we basically have no normal information. And all the details that you see here are kind of like overridden. So that's not what we want. So we're going to go bit by bit until you find something that kind of works. So I don't want to have a lot of information in the normal, just want a tiny bit. Let's concentrate on an area like this. So you can see all of those nice bubbles coming through. But in order to recreate that sort of look of the glaze, let's bring that in here. You know, so that it's very, very reflective. We don't want to have that much information or change in the details. Right? Maybe something like that is more like what I'm looking for. So it's always good to have references as to what you're trying to create. All right. Cool, I think that works. And again, let's go back to the hide just to double check that nothing has changed in here. If we enable it, right, and we can play around with this a bit more just to kind of like override what we had in the base material, like I said before. But to be honest, I think it's fine just leaving it as it is. Yeah, let's leave it off. So only the normal intensity has been tweaked from this slider, right? So just to create a variation or just to equalize the normal a little bit more. All right, let's turn this off. And yeah, we are pretty much there. Now at this point, you can go ahead and save the material. What I like to do once I finalize with the initial setup is go through the different maps that are going to be generated and essentially tweak them if I need to. So for example, the ambient occlusion, maybe the ambient occlusion is a little bit too strong. So something else you can do is go to the add layer, go to AO, and this hide to AO is basically going to look at the hide map, the hide map that we tweaked, or the difference between the hide and the low points, and it's going to create an ambient occlusion based on that. So let's see how that works. All right, there we go. So now it created a pretty strong difference between the hide points and the low points, but in the layer of the hide to AO effect, we can go ahead and change all of that. So we can change the mode from hide and use the actual normal, or we can use both normal and hide. This is usually what I use, or you can use just the normal. So you see it's different types of ambient occlusion. So let's use both of them. And of course, we can tweak the intensity so to something pretty low. We can change the spread of the ambient occlusion, and we can change the distribution. Cosine, for the most part, is the one that I use, but you can also go for uniform. Cosine is pretty good. Yeah, so let's just change the spread a little bit and reduce the intensity a tiny bit. I don't want this ambient occlusion to be that strong. There we go. So tiny little changes, but when you're working materials, the subtlety is what matters. So let's go to hide map. The hide map is looking pretty good. This material has no metallic bits in it, so this is fine as it is. The roughness, maybe this is too strong. as like the contrast is too strong. So we can go back and tweak that from the image to material, right? Remember, this is the one that we use to change the roughness. So we can go ahead and maybe change the variations a bit and reduce the base value. So that should give us something a little bit more reflective, or more specular at least. All right, I think that's working. Normal is also looking fine. It's pretty subtle, but it's there. That's exactly what I wanted. And the base color, it's a little bit different than the original image, but I think for the most part it's the same anyway. So let's have a look at the sphere that we're creating with this material. Now, in order to save this material, this is actually saved, but we haven't saved the project. So if we go down to the bottom left where it says project, here you see that we're generating kind of like this preview. I want to right click on this material and click on rename. Let's call this one Mog01. And all we have to do now is go to File and Save As. So you can save the project and you can create multiple materials that will be saved within the same project. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Save As, Pottery Materials. Right, so this is actually saving the entire project with all the layer stacks and everything like that, not just the material. This is saving the entire project, but the material is already here. Okay, so in order to export this material and use it somewhere else, all you have to do is click on Share, and this gives you the ability to send it directly to 3D Painter, or you can click on Export As and export each individual map or a SBSAR, which is the Substance 3D Asset type of file. Okay, so I'm not going to do that just yet because we're going to build more materials, but I just want to show you that it's as easy as that. Just click Export and you choose what are the maps that you're going to create. So let's cancel that. Obviously, the results of the materials that you get might change depending on the image that you use. But if you follow along and you use the same parameters and the same settings, you should get something pretty similar. One thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning here as well in the viewport is that you can change the tiling. So right now, that's what you can see, the kind of like the seam around the edges. But we can change this to, let's say, 3 to be more obvious, right? So the software is actually tiling the image across the entire sphere, or you can just go for 1 and 1, and then you get like this nice, interesting planet. Anyway, so I'm going to leave this video here, and in the next one, we're going to start tackling a more complex material. I'll see you there.